The planet was nothing like the reports had described. Calora had expected barren wastelands, desolate hills, and endless deserts. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by towering trees with thick green leaves. The air was heavy, thick with moisture. Her boots sank slightly in the soft, wet earth as she carefully moved forward. Her mission was clear: eliminate the human and retrieve the data. But as she ventured deeper into the forest, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Calora's species, the Verath, were a proud, powerful race. They had conquered countless worlds, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Fearless warriors, they were known for their ruthlessness. It was why Calora had been sent on this mission. The humans were becoming a problem, interfering with the Verath's expansion, daring to challenge their authority. And so, it was up to Calora to silence them. She had tracked the human ship's crash site for days, following the faint signals it sent out. When she finally reached the clearing, she saw it, the wreckage of the human craft, scattered across the ground like a broken toy. But there was something else. A figure emerged from the wreckage, a human, not dead as she had expected. The man stood tall, his uniform dirty, and his face smeared with dirt and blood, but his posture was calm. He didn't seem alarmed at all. In fact, his eyes were curious, almost amused. Calora raised her weapon, her finger on the trigger. Her instincts screamed that she should strike first, that she should end this before it became a fight. She had never encountered a human before, but she knew their kind was capable of violence. They were a stubborn species, quick to anger, but easily broken. "Who are you?" Calora demanded, her voice cold and harsh, the way she had been trained to speak. "What are you doing here?" The man didn't move, didn't flinch, his gaze locked onto hers. "You must be Calora," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "I wasn't expecting you so soon, but then again, it seems like you've been expecting me." Calora narrowed her eyes. How did he know her name? And why wasn't he immediately attacking? "Do you know who I am?" she asked, stepping closer, her weapon never leaving his chest. "Of course I do," he replied with a slight smile. "You're the one sent to kill me, right?" Calora was taken aback. Most humans she had encountered would have already been pleading for their lives by now. But this man, this human, didn't seem afraid. Instead, he just stood there, waiting for her to make her move. "You're a soldier," she said slowly, scanning him from head to toe. "You look different from the others I've encountered, a different kind of human." He chuckled softly, almost like he was laughing at her confusion. "I suppose you could say that. I'm Captain Adrian Rook. And you're right, I am a soldier. But I'm not here to fight you." Calora's finger tightened on the trigger. Was he trying to deceive her? Or was he truly just another weak human who had no idea what he was up against? "You should have stayed in the wreckage," she said coldly. "I won't hesitate to kill you." Rook didn't move, didn't show any fear. "I'm sure you won't," he said quietly. "But I'm not the enemy you think I am." Calora hesitated for a moment. This was unlike anything she had encountered. A human who wasn't afraid. A human who didn't try to lie or beg for mercy. Something was wrong. There was no way this was how it was supposed to go. She lowered her weapon slightly, though she didn't relax. She couldn't afford to. "What are you saying?" Rook finally took a step forward, his eyes still locked on hers. "I'm saying, let's talk. You don't have to kill me." Calora blinked. It was an offer she had never expected, not from anyone, least of all a human. But the more she looked at him, the more she realized he wasn't bluffing. He wasn't trying to deceive her. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm confidence. "You want to talk?" she asked, almost incredulous. "Yes," Rook said simply, his tone matter-of-fact. "I think there's a better way to solve this than fighting." Calora didn't know what to make of this. It was beyond anything she had prepared for, and for the first time, she was unsure of what to do next. Calora stood in silence, staring at the human before her. His calmness, his complete lack of fear, unsettled her more than anything. This wasn't what she had expected. She had assumed that humans would fight to the death at the first opportunity. But this one, Captain Adrian Rook, was different. He wasn't pleading for mercy, nor was he making any aggressive moves. He simply stood there, waiting. "What is this, human?" Kelleher asked, her voice a little sharper now. "You're not going to beg for your life. You're not going to attack me." Rook smiled slightly, the expression not mocking, but something else. Something Kelleher couldn't quite place. "I don't believe in fighting unless it's absolutely necessary," he said, his voice calm and steady. "And I don't think it's necessary right now." Kelleher blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Look, I know why you're here," Rook said, taking a step back and lowering his hands to show he wasn't armed. "I know you've been sent to kill me, but I'm not the enemy you think I am. I'm not even the enemy you've been told I am." The word hung in the air, thick with tension. Kelleher's grip tightened around her weapon. She had been trained for moments like this, to act first, think later. But something about Rook's calm, direct nature made her hesitate. It didn't fit with what she had been taught about humans. She had been told they were reckless, stubborn, and quick to resort to violence. But Rook was neither reckless nor aggressive. He was different. "What are you talking about?" she asked slowly, trying to make sense of his words. "Look, I don't know the full story," Rook said, his eyes flicking to the wreckage of his ship in the distance. "But I do know that whoever sent you, they're wrong. The Vereth and humanity, we don't have to be enemies. There's a way out of this." Kelleher's mind raced. This wasn't what she had been trained to handle. She had been prepared for an enemy that would resist, that would fight to the bitter end. But here was a human, standing before her, not afraid to die, but also not eager to fight. What was this? "Why don't you just finish me off then?" she demanded. "You're a soldier. You're supposed to kill me, aren't you?" Rook shook his head. "I could, but that won't solve anything. Killing you won't end the war. It won't make anything better. I think you know that." Kelleher frowned. Was he trying to manipulate her? Was he pretending to be reasonable just to survive? It would be easy enough to end him right now. She could fire without hesitation and walk away. But something inside her hesitated. Rook seemed to notice her doubt, and he took another slow step toward her, maintaining the same calm demeanor. "You're not like the others, Kelleher," he said, his voice low. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not here because you want to kill. You're here because you've been told it's what you have to do." Kelleher was silent, her heart pounding in her chest. He was right, but how could he know that? How could a human understand the complexities of her mission, her duty? He had no idea what it was like to be a soldier of the Vereth, to be bound by honor and fear. "I don't know what they've told you about us," Rook continued, "but we're not all the same. And neither are you. You don't have to follow orders blindly. You can choose." The words were simple, but they struck something deep inside Kelleher. She had always been told that the Vereth way was the only way, that strength and power were the only things that mattered. But Rook's words felt different. They were foreign, but they made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: doubt. For the first time in her life, Kelleher wasn't sure what to do. Her weapon was still raised, but her mind was no longer focused on killing. She didn't know why, but she lowered the weapon slightly, unsure of what would happen next. "Why are you doing this?" Kelleher asked, her voice quieter now. "Why not just kill me and be done with it? Why try to convince me?" Rook's gaze softened. "Because we don't have to be enemies, Kelleher. We can stop this madness. I know it's hard to believe, but if we both just stop fighting, maybe there's a way to make this work." Kelleher looked at him, her thoughts swirling in confusion. What was he asking? What did he expect from her? For the first time since she had arrived, she felt something unfamiliar, a small spark of hope. Could it really be possible? Could there be another way? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the distant wind rustling the leaves around them. Calora swallowed hard, trying to push away the strange feeling in her chest. She had a mission to complete. She was supposed to kill him. But in this moment, for the first time, she wasn't so sure. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the rustle of leaves. Calora couldn't stop thinking about what Rook had said. His words echoed in her mind. We don't have to be enemies. It didn't make sense, not in her world. The Verath had always been at war with everyone. It was in their blood. Their history was built on conquest, on wiping out anyone who stood in their way. And yet, here was a human telling her there was another way. She didn't know what to think. Rook walked beside her through the dense forest, his eyes scanning the surroundings like he was always on alert. He had been silent for a while, but Calora could sense he was waiting for her to speak. After a few moments, she finally broke the silence. "Why don't you just kill me, then?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You keep talking about peace, but why not take the easy way out? You don't need me alive to stop the war." Rook looked at her, his face serious, but there was no anger in his eyes, only a strange sort of understanding. "Because I don't want to win like that," he replied quietly. "I've seen enough killing. It doesn't change anything. It just keeps the cycle going. I'm not here to fight you, Calora. I'm here to stop it." Calora was silent. What was he saying? Was he so naive to think one human could stop the war? Was he really so different from the rest of them? She didn't know, but part of her couldn't help but be intrigued. After a long pause, Rook spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You know, I've been where you are." Calora turned to look at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I've been in your shoes," Rook explained. "I've been a soldier, sent to kill, sent to destroy. I've followed orders without questioning, just like you. But after a while, you start to see the cost. The people you've killed, the families you've torn apart, the wars you've fought. It gets harder to pretend it's all for some noble cause. You start wondering, is it worth it?" Calora's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard a human speak like this before. She had been trained to see humans as nothing more than obstacles, enemies to be eliminated. But this was different. She had never considered that humans might think like this, might regret the endless fighting. Rook paused, glancing at her. "I was part of a special operations team. My unit was sent to deal with a resistance group on a distant world. We were told they were terrorists. We were told they were a threat to our government. But when we got there, when we wiped them out, it wasn't what I thought it would be. It wasn't a victory. It was just more death." Calora felt a pang of something she couldn't identify. She was a soldier. She had been trained to fight, to kill, to survive. But she had never thought about it like this. She had always seen herself as part of something bigger, part of the Verath military, part of a cause that justified everything. But hearing Rook speak like this made her question everything. Was it all really justified? Was the destruction and death truly necessary? "I understand if you can't believe me," Rook continued, "or if you think I'm just trying to trick you. But I've been where you are. I know what it feels like to follow orders without asking questions. But I also know what it feels like to realize that it's not the way to live. There has to be another way." Calora's thoughts were racing. She didn't know what to say. She had spent her entire life believing that strength and power were the only things that mattered, that war and violence were the only paths to victory. She had never once stopped to think about the cost, about the people on the other side of the battlefield. The thought had never crossed her mind. Rook seemed to sense her confusion, and he gave her a small, almost sympathetic smile. "I'm not asking you to change everything overnight," he said. "But if you want, I'll help you. We can figure this out together. You don't have to be alone in this." Calora stopped walking and looked at him, her mind swirling with questions and doubts. She wanted to believe him. Something in her wanted to trust him. But she wasn't sure if she could. She had been raised to believe in the superiority of the Verath, to believe that their way was the only way. How could she just throw that away? Rook stopped too and looked back at her. I know it's hard, he said softly. But think about it. You've already taken the first step. You lowered your weapon. You're not here to kill me anymore. You're starting to see that there's another way. All I'm asking is for you to give it a chance. Calora looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, for the first time, she didn't feel entirely sure of her mission. She didn't feel entirely sure of herself. Maybe there is another way, she said quietly, more to herself than to Rook. Rook nodded, his expression hopeful. Maybe there is. The forest was quieter now. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the soft crunch of leaves beneath their boots as Calora and Rook continued their walk. Calora felt like her mind was in a constant swirl, trying to understand everything Rook had told her. She had always been sure of herself. She had always known her purpose, to fight, to conquer, to follow the orders of her commanders. But now she wasn't so sure. They had reached the edge of the forest, where the trees opened up to a small clearing. In the distance, she could see the remnants of the human ship, the one that had crashed here days ago. It had once been a symbol of power, a tool of destruction. But now it seemed like a relic, just another broken piece of the war that had brought her to this planet. Calora stopped at the edge of the clearing, her gaze fixed on the wreckage. She could almost hear the distant screams of her fallen comrades, the roar of explosions, and the sound of gunfire. This was what she knew. This was what she had been trained for. And yet, the feeling in her chest wasn't the satisfaction of victory. It wasn't the thrill of the hunt. It was something else. Something she couldn't name. You're thinking too much, Rook said quietly, stepping beside her. You don't have to figure it all out right now. I know it's a lot to take in. Calora turned to him, feeling the weight of his words. How was it that this human, someone she had been sent to kill, understood her better than anyone from her own species? She wanted to argue, to dismiss his words, but deep down, she knew he was right. She didn't have to decide everything at once. But something was pulling at her, something inside her that made her want to ask more questions, to understand what was really happening. Why do you care? She asked, her voice low. You've seen what we do. You've seen the destruction, the death. Why do you think I'll listen to you? Rook smiled, but it wasn't a smug smile. It was gentle, almost understanding. Because I've been where you are. I've seen the destruction too. I've caused some of it, and I've watched others suffer because of it. But I also know that we don't have to keep doing this. It's not about being weak or being a coward. It's about choosing something better. Calora took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling into her chest. She had always believed that power came from force, that strength was about who could destroy the most. But Rook's words were different. He wasn't asking her to be weak. He was asking her to be strong in a different way. Do you really think this war will end? Calora asked, her voice almost a whisper. Do you think there's any way to stop it? Rook didn't hesitate. Yes, he said firmly. I believe it can end. But it's going to take both of us. It's going to take people on both sides willing to stop fighting and start talking. It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. But if we don't try, then everything we've done will have been for nothing. Calora stared at him, unsure of what to say. He sounded so certain, but could she really believe him? She had been trained to think the opposite. She had been trained to destroy, to fight until there was no one left to fight. But Rook was offering her something she had never been given before. A choice. A choice. For the first time in her life, Calora realized she didn't have to follow orders blindly. She could choose her own path. And that scared her more than anything. She glanced down at the weapon in her hand, feeling the weight of it. It had been a symbol of power for so long, something that had given her purpose. But now it felt wrong. It felt like an anchor, pulling her back to the past, to the world she was beginning to question. Rook watched her, his expression patient. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now," he said. "I just want you to think about it. Think about what you want. What kind of future do you want to create?" Kelleher didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure what she wanted. She wasn't sure what she could believe anymore. But as she looked at Rook, something inside her stirred. She had always believed in the Verith way, in the idea that strength could only come from power. But Rook was showing her that maybe there was more to strength than just destruction. "I don't know what to do," Kelleher said quietly, her voice cracking slightly. "You don't have to know everything right now," Rook replied. "Just know that you don't have to fight anymore. You don't have to be alone. There's another way." Kelleher looked out across the clearing again, the wreckage of the ship standing in the distance. The past seemed so close, so real. But the future was still a mystery. For the first time, she didn't know what would happen next. But she also knew something else. Whatever happened, the choice was hers. The next morning, the air felt different. There was still a sense of danger in the world, but something had shifted. Kelleher walked silently beside Rook, her mind a maze of thoughts. Every step she took, every glance at the wreckage of the human ship, reminded her that she had to make a choice. But what was the right choice? The day was bright, the sun peeking through the trees, but Kelleher couldn't shake the weight on her chest. Rook's words had stuck with her all night. You don't have to fight anymore. He had given her something she had never had before, the freedom to decide, the freedom to question everything she had ever believed in. She had been trained to follow orders without question, to never stop and think about the consequences. But now, for the first time in her life, she was questioning everything. The Verith military, her commanders, her training, it all seemed so distant now. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She couldn't pretend it was all for some noble cause. Rook glanced over at her as they walked, his expression unreadable. "I know this isn't easy," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to have the answers right away." Kelleher didn't respond immediately. She just kept walking, her gaze fixed ahead. She wasn't sure where she was going anymore. The mission had been simple at first. Find the human, kill him, and report back. But now, everything was complicated. There were no clear answers, and that scared her. "What happens now?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Rook took a deep breath and stopped walking, turning to face her. "Now, we figure out how to end this war. We talk. We find a way to stop the fighting. We find a way to make peace. But I need you with me, Kelleher. I can't do this alone." Kelleher stopped as well, feeling the weight of his words. "You really think peace is possible?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "After everything that's happened, after all the destruction?" Rook nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. I've seen it. I've seen people put down their weapons and find a way to live together. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it's possible." Kelleher felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. Could she really do this? Could she really turn her back on everything she had been taught, everything she had fought for? "We'll be seen as traitors," Kelleher said quietly, almost to herself. "Both of us. The Verith will never forgive me. And the humans, they'll never trust me." Rook's gaze softened. "You don't have to do it alone. There are others who feel the same way. Others who are tired of the war, tired of the killing. You're not alone in this, Kelleher." Kelleher didn't respond. She wanted to believe him. But the thought of betrayal, of leaving everything she had known behind, was terrifying. She had spent her entire life learning how to fight, how to destroy. What was left for her if she chose peace? "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can just walk away from everything." Rook took a step closer to her, his voice calm and reassuring. "You don't have to walk away from everything. You just have to walk towards something better. A future where you don't have to fight, where you don't have to kill, where you can be more than just a soldier." Kelleher felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She had always been a soldier, a weapon for the Verith. But now, Rook was offering her something she had never even considered. A life without violence. A life where she could choose her own path. "I've been fighting my whole life," Kelleher said softly. "I don't know who I am without it." Rook looked at her for a long moment, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're Kelleher. Not a soldier. Not a weapon. Just Kelleher. And you have the power to decide what comes next." Kelleher's heart pounded in her chest as she thought about what Rook had said. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. She had the power to choose. She didn't have to keep following orders. She didn't have to keep killing. But there were consequences. If she chose peace, she would lose everything. She would be labeled a traitor, hunted by her own people. And what if the humans didn't trust her? What if Rook's hope for peace was nothing more than a dream? Still, something inside her stirred. Something that told her this was the right path. Maybe it wouldn't be easy. Maybe it wouldn't be fast. But it was a path worth taking. She took a deep breath and looked up at Rook. "I'm ready to try," she said, her voice steady. Rook's eyes softened, a small smile forming on his lips. "That's all I'm asking." Kelleher felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She was choosing to make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, she could help bring an end to the war. Kelleher stood at the edge of the camp, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the trees. The air was quiet, but there was tension everywhere. Her decision to stand with Rook had been made, but the path ahead was still unclear. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain: it wasn't going to be easy. She could hear voices behind her, murmurs of the small group of humans who had taken refuge with them. Rook had led her to a hidden location far from the Verith military base, a place where they could plan without the constant threat of discovery. There were others here, humans who had grown tired of the endless fighting and wanted peace. They had joined Rook's cause, and now Kelleher was a part of it. But her presence was unsettling. She could feel it, the eyes watching her, the whispers behind her back. The humans hadn't fully accepted her yet. And why would they? She was a Verith soldier, a member of the enemy. Even though she had lowered her weapon and pledged to fight for peace, that didn't erase her past. She couldn't blame them for being cautious. "You're thinking too hard." Rook's voice broke through her thoughts. He stepped up beside her, his tone light but understanding. Kelleher sighed, turning to face him. "I don't belong here," she said quietly. "Not yet. Not after everything I've done." Rook gave her a sympathetic look. "You're here now. That's what matters. You don't have to prove anything to them. You're proving it to yourself." She nodded but didn't feel convinced. She didn't know if she could ever truly prove herself. Her past was filled with battles and bloodshed, things she couldn't undo. The weight of it was heavy on her shoulders. She had always been the one to fight, to win, to conquer. But now she was trying to change, trying to become something else, and she wasn't sure if it was even possible. Just then, a voice called out to them from the other side of the camp. It was one of the humans who had joined Rook's group, a tall man with a scar across his cheek. He was walking toward them with a determined look in his eyes. "Rook," the man said, his tone sharp. "We need to talk." Rook's expression hardened slightly, and he nodded. "I'll be right there, Ben." The man turned and walked away, leaving Kelleher and Rook alone again. "You're worried," Kelleher said, watching Rook's face. What did he want? Rook ran a hand through his hair. "It's nothing to worry about. Just some concerns. About the group. About you." Kelleher stiffened. She could tell Rook wasn't being entirely honest, but she didn't press him. Instead, she turned back to the horizon, trying to focus on the silence around them. But the unease in the camp was growing, and she could feel it in her bones. She hadn't realized how deeply her past actions would haunt her. The others, especially the humans, saw her as a reminder of everything they were fighting against. Even if she had changed, even if she had put down her weapon, that didn't change the fact that she was a Verath soldier. She had been trained to be ruthless, to follow orders without question, and those memories followed her like shadows. As night began to fall, the camp settled into an uneasy quiet. Kelleria sat near the fire, her eyes drifting over the faces of the humans around her. They were all watching her with suspicion, and she couldn't blame them. She had been their enemy, their worst nightmare. Now she was sitting among them, hoping to be accepted. Rook sat beside her, breaking the silence. "They'll come around," he said softly, his voice steady. "It takes time, but they'll see. They'll understand." "I'm not so sure," Kelleria replied, her voice low. "How do you know they'll accept me? I've done things that can't be forgiven." Rook turned to her, his expression serious. "You're not asking for forgiveness. You're asking for a chance. That's all anyone can ask for." Kelleria didn't know what to say to that. Rook had a way of making things sound simple, but nothing about this was simple. She wasn't sure if she could ever be forgiven, not by the humans, not by herself. Her past was something she couldn't escape, no matter how hard she tried. Just then, Ben returned, his face tight with frustration. "We need to talk," he said again, more urgently this time. Rook stood up, giving Kelleria one last look before following Ben into the shadows. Kelleria remained by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. She knew there was no easy answer to this, no quick solution. She had chosen this path, but the road ahead was uncertain and dangerous. The humans might never fully trust her. The Verath might never forgive her. But maybe, just maybe, she could prove them wrong. The fire crackled and popped, and Kelleria's heart pounded in her chest. For the first time, she wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was clear. She had to keep moving forward, even if the enemy was no longer the humans. The real enemy was the doubt inside her. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Kelleria's presence in the camp had become a constant source of tension. The humans were trying to adjust, to accept the idea of a former enemy fighting alongside them for peace. But every time she looked around, she saw the doubt in their eyes. Every time they spoke to her, their words carried a weight: suspicion, fear, and resentment. Kelleria knew it would take time. But time was running out. The Verath forces were closing in. They had tracked her down, and they would come for her, whether she was ready or not. The night before the battle, Kelleria stood alone near the edge of the camp. The moonlight bathed the forest in a soft glow, and the air was cool against her skin. She had always been alone in her life, even when surrounded by others. But now, standing here, she felt the weight of her choices more than ever. She had stepped away from everything she had known, from the only life she had ever understood. And now, she had to make it right. Behind her, Rook's voice broke the silence. "You're thinking too much again," he said, his footsteps quiet as he approached. Kelleria turned to face him, her gaze distant. "I can't help it. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Rook smiled softly, the familiar warmth in his eyes. "You're doing exactly what you're supposed to. You're trying. That's all anyone can do." But Kelleria wasn't so sure. Her mind kept replaying the memories of her training. The drills, the orders, the blood. The Verath way had always been clear: survival through strength, victory through power. But now she was fighting for something different. Peace, not war. Understanding, not destruction. "I'm not sure I'm ready," she admitted quietly. "I've spent my whole life fighting, Rook. I don't know if I can just turn that off." Rook stepped closer, his voice calm. "You don't have to turn it off. You just have to choose which side of yourself you want to lead. The soldier or the person you can be. That's the real battle." Kelleria looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She had never been given a choice like this before. Every decision in her life had been made for her, every action determined by the Verath. But now, with Rook's support, she had the freedom to choose. And that was both terrifying and liberating. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps approached, and Ben, The scared man appeared from the shadows. His expression was grim, and Calera immediately sensed something was wrong. "The Verath are close," Ben said, his voice low. "We don't have much time." Rook's expression hardened, and he nodded. "Then we don't waste any more of it." Calera's heart raced as she followed them to the center of the camp, where the others were gathered. The humans were ready for the fight, but Calera felt a pang of doubt. She wasn't sure if she was ready to fight against her own kind, even if it meant protecting those who had given her a chance. As they prepared for the battle, Calera felt her hands shake. She gripped her weapon, but it didn't feel like her own anymore. It was a tool of destruction, something she had used countless times, but now it felt wrong. She wasn't sure she could kill anymore, not for a cause that didn't make sense to her. "You don't have to fight the way you've always fought," Rook said, noticing her hesitation. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've already chosen the better path. You don't have to prove anything." Calera met his eyes, and for the first time, she felt a spark of confidence. She wasn't just a weapon anymore. She was something more. She was part of something bigger than herself, something that could change the future. As the sounds of the approaching Verath forces grew louder, Calera took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready." The battle was fierce. The humans fought bravely, but the Verath were relentless. Calera's mind raced as she faced off against her former comrades. She couldn't forget the face of the soldier charging at her, couldn't ignore the voice in her head, telling her to fight with all her might. But she didn't. Instead, she lowered her weapon when she had the chance and disarmed her opponent, choosing restraint over violence. She didn't need to kill. She didn't need to destroy. There were other ways to win. As the battle raged on, Calera found herself fighting for more than just survival. She fought for a future where peace could exist. And in that moment, she realized something. The enemy wasn't just the Verath. It was the belief that war was the only way. The real battle was within her, the choice between continuing the cycle of violence or breaking it for good. The fighting eventually stopped. The Verath forces, outnumbered and shocked by Calera's actions, fell back. The humans, exhausted but victorious, gathered together. Calera stood among them, her chest heaving, but a sense of peace washing over her. Rook walked up to her, a tired smile on his face. "You did it." Calera looked around, taking in the faces of the humans who had once feared her. They were no longer afraid. They saw her for who she had become, not for the soldier she had been. She had chosen peace, and for the first time in her life, she truly felt free. "I did it," she whispered, finally believing it. The battle was over, but the real journey was just beginning.